So they say that on average, 9 languages die every year. Now, I don't know how many cuisines die per year, but there definitely are some out there that are definitely getting pretty endangered. And I don't know, maybe nobody cares, but like, just imagine if one day the very last bacon, egg, and cheese slides onto a New York bagel, or the very last fish and chips come out of a deep fat fryer. The world would lose something, right? Now, the city of Macau, it's one of my favorite places anywhere in the world to eat. There's very good Cantonese food. There's also some pretty cool Portuguese food. And interestingly, there's also Macau's local cuisine. Because unlike the Brits in Hong Kong across the estuary, the residents of Macau, they were often mixed Eurasians, and they developed their own unique cuisine, their own variant of egg tarts, probably most famously, but they've also got stuff like duck rice or their own unique style fermented shrimp paste. And so if you're somebody like me or Steph or really anybody that kind of straddles in between the worlds of Chinese food culture and Western food culture, I think it's really natural to be intrigued by the people that came before us in Macau. But even though the Macanese, they were renowned for being these really good cooks, there never really were that many of them. So then, as the world's decolonized, this culture, it's begun to fade away, dissolving into either Chinese or often Western societies. There's still restaurants in Macau that serve this stuff, but you could probably count the really good ones on one hand. It's not dead, but it's definitely endangered. But Macanese food, I think, it has a lot to teach us still, with culinary lessons there buried like treasures. For example, this dish here is Porco Balichão Tamarindo, and it's not just a tasty stew, but also made me really rethink how food actually spreads and moves around the world. Because if you look at a lot of food media, they'll often say that Macanese food is Cantonese, Portuguese fusion. And like a lot of Macanese dishes, sort of blurs that line between Cantonese and Western cooking. But then, if that's the case, how are we to make sense of this thing? It's a very classic Macanese dish, and there's stuff in there that might feel explainably Chinese Western. Marinating fatty meat, frying shrimp paste in lard, that kind of thing. But then the braise finishes with the titular tamarind juice for a sour kick. But Cantonese food, it doesn't use tamarind. And as far as I know, Portuguese food doesn't either. So then, what's going on? Now, we might be able to get a small clue from the ingredient list itself. From what I've read, the general sort of Southeast Asian shrimp paste, like the kind that you might see in Thai cuisine or Malaysia, it's not a direct sub for Macau's traditional balichao. There's some old recipes out there, but unfortunately, balichao is brutally difficult to find these days. So in the Macanese diaspora, people tend to recommend this product. It's a Filipino shrimp paste. It's concocted from a genus called Acetas, and as you can see, it's a lot less fermented. So Macanese diaspora, they'll then mix this with what's missing from some of their traditional recipes, and it seems to all work out well enough. Now, this product, it's called Bagong Alamang. So for the sake of completeness, maybe we can check out YouTube and see how this stuff is eaten down in the Philippines. So, this is a little weird. The combination of Bagong Alamang and pork, it seems to be equally classic to the Philippines and exist over there in two forms, sauce form and braise form. So okay, fatty pork, check, aromatics, check, shrimp paste, check, and then at the very end, they'll hit it with white vinegar for a sour component. Now, this kind of hurts my brain. I'm pretty sure that I've read the Treaty of Tordesillas right, but there might just be a possible indirect connection here, and that connection being the Chinese of Southeast Asia. Because historically, the Macanese people, they weren't usually the product of unions between Portuguese and Cantonese. The Qing dynasty, they forbade that. So Portuguese, they'd often marry down south in Malacca and then bring their wives up to Macau. And often, those wives, they were Peranakan, themselves a mix between Chinese and Malay. And of course, there was also a ton of contact amongst the entire Portuguese trading empire, ships going back and forth between Macau and Malacca, Goa, and points beyond. So, in a lot of ways, Macanese food is equally, if not more, part of this network than a Chinese one. So, for this specific dish, I don't really know why, but once you know what you're looking for, in pockets all across Southeast Asia, Bader Meinhof really starts to set in, like Philippines, Myanmar, and most critically for us, Malaysia, where there's a Kristang Malacca Portuguese dish called Kari Porco Tamarindo. And these influences, they will be important for us to try to recreate this dish today. Because while there are resources out there for Macanese food, most of the recipes are or are otherwise closely based off of historical recipes. Now, if you've never worked off of historical recipes before, what you have to understand is that you cannot charge into them blind. You have to interpret them because they'll usually leave out a bunch of little steps that the writer would have found to be self-obvious. Because like these days, I think recipes are functionally like little classes to teach people how to cook. But in the past, people on average kind of already knew how to cook. They'd learned from their family. So recipes instead were a lot more like chef's notes. For example, I think for a lot of you, if I told you that my mac and cheese is a bechamel mac and cheese, 2 parts American, 1 part cheddar, a little bit of parm, and then coated with seasoned breadcrumbs and baked, you'd get it. But if you were coming from a different time or a different culture, there would be a lot in those instructions that would trip you up. So then, now let's take a look at a tamarind pork recipe, courtesy the excellent Macanese library. Awesome source, more on them later. It instructs us to add a 1/4 cup of tamarind that's been soaked beforehand. But if you follow those specific words on that page literally, you're going to have a bad time. It's assumed that you know that you should soak solely the pulp of the tamarind. You should also know that you should be getting the sour tamarind, not the sweet tamarind. You should know the correct concentration of pulp to water. And of course, you should also know that you're going to be discarding the strings and seeds at the end. You can't divorce the instructions from their context. Then the second thing with historical recipes that's crucial to understand is that ingredients in the past, they were different from ingredients today. Like almost universally so, but most fundamentally meat. After all meat was farm meat. It got more exercise, so cuts, they were both tougher and more flavorful. Like, I can't seem to find it right now, but I distinctly remember this one thread on r/askculinary where somebody actually bought fancy, all-natural, happy enough farm chicken for the first time in their life, and the flavor freaked them out so much that they assumed that the chicken had gone bad. We're just working off of different animals. So in these recipes, a lot of them they'll call for pork leg, presumably because they want a mix of lean and fat. But if you use pork leg with modern pork, especially outside of China, the end result is going to be super dry. What we'll need to use is shoulder, which has a lot more connective tissue. If you can get a shoulder like this with the fat and skin included, that's awesome. But today, we'll be using the internationally available Boston butt for the lean and pork belly for the fat component. This combination is going to give us an end result that's going to be closer to our historical dish than if we were just following the recipe blind. But, like with all recipes everywhere, it's really important to also activate your own personal kitchen common sense. Like, I don't know about you, but for me, I know that if I braised a bunch of pork that's this fatty, I'm going to wind up with like a massive layer of grease that's swimming on top. But when we ate this thing in Macau, there wasn't a big layer of grease on top. I don't know what the restaurant does, but at least for my tastes, I think I'm definitely gonna have to do something. Now, I could just call for lean, but I did want that lard and richness, so I decided to take a little bit of inspiration from that Filipino video from before. There, they first render out the grease before they cook everything together, which, to be crystal clear, I've never ever seen from a Macanese recipe, but I think that it'll be a smart idea to help be able to control the final fat content of the dish. So then, I'll take 250 grams of pork belly and cut it into thick strips, together with any obvious fatty bits from my half kilo of Boston butt. Sprinkle over an eighth teaspoon salt, mix, then coat with a tablespoon of oil, and add that to a cool pot together with a quarter cup of water, and over a medium flame, slowly begin to render out that lard. And as that's rendering, we'll then mix the rest of the lean with an eighth teaspoon salt, an eighth teaspoon white pepper powder, a half tablespoon light soy sauce, a half teaspoon dark soy sauce, another half tablespoon of brandy, and coat it all with a bit of oil, and marinate that as the lard's rendering out, which will take about a half an hour or so. And so after that time, this is what we're looking at here. We won't want to take this all the way to crisp for textural reasons. A bit of fat will still be good, but now we've got a lot of lard here to work with. So, then to finally make the Porco Balichão Tamarindo, to 3 tablespoons worth of our rendered lard, we'll start by frying the marinated pork on high. Once it's roughly browned, remove it and add that together with the browned rendered belly. Then we'll go in with 1 onion very finely minced, let that sweat over our medium-high for about 2 minutes, and once you can hear frying sounds once again, toss in 5 cloves of equally finely minced garlic. Fry for another minute, then we'll scooch those over to the side, adding another tablespoon lard if we need, and then go in with 3 tablespoons of our Filipino shrimp paste. Now again, the old recipes for Balichão, they're basically that sort of fermented shrimps plus these. For some Balichão applications, for example, maybe this one, you might want to do the same move as the diaspora and let that all sit together and mingle for about a month. But because this is a stew and it doesn't go that heavy on the flavor, I do think that we're going to have a good bit more flexibility. So I chose to go straight Filipino bagong alamang, and then incorporate these elements in with the braise itself. But you can also definitely make your own judgment calls here. Also, as a final shrimp paste aside, in my personal opinion, I do think that you would also be able to substitute this with a Cantonese shrimp paste as well. It's a little different, but it's still good. If you're going that route, though, only use 1 tablespoon worth because Cantonese shrimp paste, it's a bit saltier and it's a lot more concentrated. So then, together with that, I went with 4 dried bay leaves, 2 whole cloves, a half teaspoon of a red chili powder, and then fry that all together for about a minute and then mix. Then we'll go in with 2 tablespoons worth of brandy and let that all evaporate away until it's pasty. Then add back in the pork. Add enough water to just basically almost submerge everything, and then bring it to a boil. Then we'll go in with a half teaspoon of chicken bouillon powder, an optional teaspoon of lemon zest, 40 grams of jaggery or dark brown sugar, and 2 teaspoons of dark soy sauce. The reason for the dark soy is because I imagine that the historical recipes, being part of this kind of general trading network, probably would have been using palm jaggery, which has got a lot deeper color than this kind of Chinese cane jaggery. So dark soy sauce, it'll be able to split the difference here, but either way, just let that braise for 2 hours. And as that's braising then, we can soak our tamarind. So this here is just a bit of pure tamarind pulp, about 1 tablespoon worth, that we soaked in with a quarter cup of hot boiled water. Just let that soak as the pork is simmering and then strain it into a bowl. Then, after all of that time, for the stew now, this is what we're looking at. Now I want this to be a bit thick like the restaurants. So now I'll swap my flame to medium-high and let that rapidly reduce. Once you're looking at something that's starting to appear like a sort of curry-like consistency, Add in that sour tamarind liquid, and I like doing half of it at first and adding the remainder to taste, as tamarind can be pretty powerful stuff. You'll be looking for the dish to have a minor sweet-sour sort of element, but not so sour that it puckers your lips. Then add in your seasoning, which up here on the screen, and optionally finish with a bit more of that rendered lard together with a couple of fresh chilies. But it's not just the dish, but also the way that it was served that I think is really quite cool. Because in my life, for me personally, in Guangdong, at like expat potlucks and the like, there would often be this dynamic where a lot of us, we would cook maybe American or Western or fusiony dishes, and it would end up being people's Cantonese SOs or spouses that would end up frying the vegetable to actually complete the meal. And I don't know, maybe the Macanese, they had something similar going on, because often for the vegetables, they would serve things alongside a Cantonese style stir fried veg. But really interesting is the starch that was served alongside this specific dish, which was something called pressed rice. Now, I've personally never seen anything like this before. It's basically rice cooked in with scallion lard and then pressed and then cut in wedges, kind of like a pie. To make it, first fry the minced part of one scallion in with 2 tablespoons of lard that we rendered off before for 1 to 2 minutes. Then add in 300 grams of thoroughly rinsed rice. Mix, then toss in enough water to get about 2 centimeters above the rice and cover. With the flame on medium then, allow that to cook for 20 minutes. Then swap the flame to low and cook for another 10. Then heat off to allow it to steam for a final 10 minutes. And after that time, mix in the green bits of the scallion that we used before. Then just toss that onto a plate and first press the rice down as flat as feasible, and then go around and make a little dome. Then just repeat those moves about 3 or 4 times, or until the rice is obviously bonded together, and then slice those wedges. Serve alongside the pork and the vegetable, being sure to use all that rice to sop up all of the tamarind sauce. So now, there's always something a little nerve-wracking for me covering Macanese food, because as you can tell, I'm not Macanese and neither's Steph. Now, that usually doesn't stop us on this channel, but for something like this that's kind of endangered, there's this really nagging sense of like, what if my judgment calls were wrong? What if they were totally off? Like, there's an uncertainty margin that's baked into the cake here. So definitely don't take our recipe here today as gospel. Definitely check out the aforementioned Macanese library, where in addition to more information on the Macanese people, you can also find hundreds and hundreds of unadulterated historical recipes. My personal favorite collection is from somebody called Gilly. Her cooking instincts, they really bleed onto the page. She localizes a ton, and I don't know. Back during the COVID lockdown days in China, when it wasn't super comfortable being a foreigner here, I did personally find a lot of comfort with those recipes. So they're really cool. I hope you can check them out. But again, I'm obviously very not Macanese. So if you want to learn about the general context of this cuisine, I cannot recommend this book highly enough. The Making of Macau's Fusion Cuisine by Annabelle Jackson. It's in English, very valuable sociological work here. We've learned a ton from it. But if you'll notice, this copy here, it's in Chinese. And if you zoom and enhance, you can find one of the translators, our very own Stephanie Lee, who is the lead translator of all the food-related chapters in this book. And so if you happen to be watching this video like in the first week that it's out, and you also happen to be living in Hong Kong, and you also happen to be there on July 16th, 6:30 p.m., Annabelle and also Steph, they'll be giving a talk at the Hong Kong Book Fair. So you can join me in the audience if you want. More information on that in the notes below. And of course, written recipe is also down there in the Substack link. And of course, subscribe for more Chinese cooking videos.